Here's an opening statement that's sure to win over your hearts. I don't think it's too far-fetched to claim that one of the most toxic video game fanbases that exists is the Sonic fandom. Some of the most vocal, passionate, biased, and nostalgia-driven video game critics of all time are seen across the board here. And I know what you're thinking. This channel is called Nintendine, so I'm clearly going to hold a bias against Sonic. And you couldn't be any more wrong. You see, I'm not like all the other Nintendo fans that grew up playing Sonic on the GameCube and claim that's why their opinion holds value. I didn't show up to the party after Sega collapsed and went third party. I was there in the 90s. I was a boy that grew up in a Nintendo household, which suddenly found itself with a Sega Genesis. I remember being stoked to find out in Sonic 3 you could fly with tails from the kids in the playground. I inherited my big brother's SNES at 6 and traded it with my friend's Sega Genesis by 7. I remember our launch Nintendo 64, and I remember trading it in for our launch Dreamcast. I was there. I lived it, I breathed it, and I loved every second of it. Also, I have a 14-part retrospective series where I spend way too much time defending Heroes, Shadow 05, Sonic 06, and the storybook games, Lost World, and Forces. Without further ado, welcome to my classic era of Sonic review. Now, after that intro, I hope you're ready for Whiplash, because I'm 99% sure I never actually played Sonic 1 on original hardware. I vividly remember having Sonic 2 and 3 and Knuckles on my tiny Sega Genesis 3, but I don't recall ever grabbing Sonic 1. And I know exactly why. When Sonic 1 was released, Sega was still trying to get its head in the game. They were literally trying to find a mascot to combat Nintendo's Mario. Someone faster, more hip, and all around cooler to push children that were playing Mario at 6 years old to jump to Sonic at 12. A marketing push that put a dent in Nintendo's success in the early 90s. Something thought to be impossible. And man, what a dent. My older siblings had an NES and an SNES before I could even hold a controller. We were very much a Nintendo family, and heck, we still are. But at the time, in elementary school in the mid-90s, Sonic had won the playgrounds. If you liked Mario, you were made fun of, you were laughed at, you were considered a baby. And while I never understood it at the time, that was Sega's plan all along. We had to get a Sega Genesis. I could basically not show my face in school if I didn't play Sonic. So I got one. My memory is a bit blurry, but I'm pretty sure I traded my Super Nintendo for my friend's Sega Genesis around 1st or 2nd grade. And goodness, I loved every second of that Genesis. The reality is though, I don't really know anyone that actually had Sonic 1. Everyone always had Sonic 2, and most people had 3 and possibly Knuckles as well. I could be wrong, but I remember most Sega Genesises were sold bundled with Sonic 2 by the mid-90s. So maybe it was just my generational experience, but Sonic 1 was the least popular game of the Genesis classics. I mean, it's entirely possible we had the game but just didn't play it because the other two were better. I'm not sure. All I know is that I didn't experience Sonic 1 until I played it on Android back in 2017. I was very late to the party, but I remember absolutely loving the game. Granted, it had been the first Sonic game I had played in quite a while, but those Android releases really helped re-spark my love interest in video games after college. At the time, I wasn't even that big into listening to all the video game channels, so it wasn't until after playing this game that I came across reviews from some of my favorite YouTubers. Which means I had a fairly pure experience with the Android port of Sonic 1 and loved it without my opinion being tainted by the masses online. And honestly, I didn't even realize the spin dash was only added in that release, but thank goodness it was because I can't imagine a classic Sonic game without the spin dash. Back in 2017, I played the game using touch controls and I thought they were more than viable enough to get me through the game. But obviously, it feels so much better to play this game with a controller. And for the sake of ease of access, I generally revisit the game through Origins. Sonic has a pretty nuanced art style. You can see a team that put a lot of effort into making each zone stick out with its own theme. Green Hill Zone is absolutely stunning, but as has been said a million times before, it's probably the highlight of the entirety of Sonic 1. It's not all bad, but when you're halfway through the game and you're looking at Starlight Zone, it's hard to be impressed. So while it is charming, the art style is kind of underwhelming. That being said, the game has some fun music that many people don't seem to appreciate as much as I do. I mean, Labyrinth Zone is actually one of my all-time favorites. It's got this weird use of string instruments, I think, with a catchy tune that you could almost use to sing along with lyrics to any random song you've heard. My name is Cleveland Brown, and I am proud to be right back in my hometown with my new... sorry about that. It gets me every time. But the point is, I think I love the music in Sonic 1 a lot more than most people do. In any case, Sonic 1's short journey suffers from being the first title in a series. 6 zones, 3 acts, with the end of each third act finding you face off against Robotnik himself. Green Hill Zone Act 1 teaches you how to Sonic. It teaches you about physics. It teaches you to keep hold of your rings. It teaches you that it's good to go fast. Everything about Green Hill Zone Act 1 is amazing. Everything. It's almost a demo of what Sonic stands for. And sure, Acts 2 and 3 might not be as good, but they're no slouches. It's when you get to the next zone, Marble Zone, that things start to slow down. Quite literally. The problem though is that if you're a Sonic fan, you want to go fast. You gotta go fast. But I guess this wasn't fully established yet during the design of Sonic 1. Because if Green Hill Zone taught you of Sonic's speeds and tested your reflexes, Marble Zone's sole purpose was to remind you that at the end of the day, Sonic is still a platformer. I actually don't think it's terrible, a lot of people hate it a lot more than I do, but if you don't try to speed through Marble Zone, it's pretty easy. But that's the issue most people have with Marble Zone, they don't want to go slow. I mentioned in my classic Mario video that I'm okay with levels that unfairly punish you when you get closer to the endgame. I think Marble Zone would have done better as a second last or final stage in the game, where it abruptly stops you from speeding and tests your platforming you did throughout the game. But unfortunately, it's not the case, and as a second zone, I can only imagine how many people it turned off from this game altogether. And what's worse is that after that, it doesn't get much better, because as you continue through the next zones, you find more and more acts that basically feed you into this false sense of security where you think it's okay to go fast, only to rug pull you in the last second and cause you to lose a life. Ultimately, you can get through the game fairly easy if you approach it not as a physics-based speed platformer, but rather as a slow and regular platformer. Which, for me, means it doesn't offer enough outside of Green Hill Zone and a handful of scattered highlights later on in the game. Like the frustrating but enjoyable boss fight in Labyrinth Zone, or the much more iconic final boss fight, or the all-around better theming and puzzles in the game. I like Sonic 1, but it fires just a bit too short for me. And it doesn't help that it doesn't really offer enough of a completion bonus, and the bonus stages quite frankly are not worth going through. There is virtually no reward of value. If you beat the game, you get to play with Tails or Sonic and Tails, but due to the way the acts are designed, it's not really worth running through the game again with the changing characters. And likewise, while you could collect the emeralds to unlock Knuckles for Sonic 1, it doesn't add anything of value to the game except allowing you yet another playthrough. And I just don't find this game worth replaying or going for full completion. Play it once and move on. I'm going to go a bit out of release order here because for the uninitiated, Sonic CD was developed simultaneously with Sonic 2, but with a different team in Japan than the US team that worked on Sonic 2. And for the sake of this video, I think it'll flow better to do CD before Sonic 2. That being said, I also can't really pinpoint the popularity of Sonic CD on its original release. It came out for Sega's obscure CD add-on that approximately 4.5 people bought. This thing failed because it was an add-on rather than a whole new console. I'm not an expert on Sega's downfall by any means, but I have to imagine it started from this point. Console add-ons just don't work. I mean, the Wii U failed because people thought it was an add-on, and it wasn't. Regardless, Sonic CD was released with Sega CD, and obviously the best-selling title on it, and very likely the main reason why many people even purchased it. And I mean, kudos to Sega because at the time Sonic was clearly a system seller. Compared to the other games in the series, Sonic CD was largely seen as the mysterious title everyone wanted to play but not too many got to experience. For years it was talked about on the playgrounds. The cinematics, the cutscenes, Amy, Metal Sonic. Only the lucky kids could convince their parents to get the elusive Sega CD. Eventually it released on PC, and a few more people got their hands on it, which strangely meant less people were talking about it. And eventually that PC version was released as part of the Sonic Gems collection on GameCube and PS2 as well. By that point, I think it was clear to everyone that the only reason Sonic CD was as hyped as it was in the 90s was because it had a cool animated intro, and not enough people got to actually play it. By the time it came out of the Gems collection and became mainstream, the way to play classic Sonic had already been established, and Sonic CD suffered from being too different from Sonic 2 and 3. And that was the case until the mobile remaster released in 2011. Along with many other quality of life improvements, it added the Sonic 2 and 3 Spin Dash, threw on some touchscreen controls, and single-handedly made classic Sonic games relevant again. Sonic CD's mobile port was the first of the Christian Whitehead remasters, and if he had never released a proof of concept of his retro engine, we'd probably live in a world where Sonic Mania doesn't exist. And honestly, I don't know if Sonic's current popularity would exist either. I may be reaching a bit, but I genuinely believe Christian Whitehead might have played an immense role in saving Sonic. I know he did for me. Shoot, I had actually totally forgotten Sonic CD was even a game before his remaster came out. In fact, all those stories about Sonic CD being discussed in the playground, those are just my experiences. It was a game on an obscure add-on that I knew I'd never convince my parents to buy, and we almost never bought games on our PC. Heck, you could have told me Sonic 3D Blast was Sonic CD and I'd probably believe you. All I know is the first time I played Sonic CD was around 2017, after I had played and beaten Sonic 1 and 2 mobile ports. And I know for a fact at the time I enjoyed the heck out of it, even though I could tell it was clearly different, but I'll get to that. With that being said, Sonic CD is gorgeous. There wasn't a single moment during the game where I felt they had held out. The only complaint I can see people make is that the colors might be a little too 90s-esque, but other than that, But other than that, I think this is an all-around gorgeous game to play, and there are some moments where you can definitely see the benefits of the CD add-on. And the soundtrack is bumping. I enjoy it more than Sonic 1's, but not by too much. And by that, I mean Sonic CD's Japanese soundtrack, since that was the one that was set as default in the Android port, so that is really all I know. But in regards to the actual gameplay, there are 3 ways to play Sonic CD's 7 zones. The first way is to simply move right and try to get to the end of the stage. This was how I experienced the game when I first played it back in 2017. I didn't care about completing the whole past and future timeline stuff, I just wanted to run through the game for the first time. Playing the game like this is why I didn't enjoy it as much as Sonic 1 through 3. While the stages are all gorgeous and have some good moments in them, a lot of them were either a bit too short or too frustrating to enjoy in the same way I could the other Sonic titles. It was quick, you could run through it in less than an hour probably if you're just trying to get to the end of the level as fast as you can. In Sonic 1 the game had you do a lot of platforming outside of Green Hill Zone, and the platforming wasn't even that enjoyable. But the stages were designed in a relatively linear fashion, so you'd get to experience everything that was intended if you were just trying to run through the game. In Sonic 2 they took what they learned in Green Hill Zone and applied it to the rest of the game, allowing players to run through the game as fast as they can. In Sonic CD, however, you'll see a lot more of the platforming that was experienced in Sonic 1. The problem is the acts are much larger and have so many more routes that seem completely wasted since you can just blast through most of the stages fairly quickly. I personally don't think it's all that fun to play Sonic CD this way. If you're looking for a Sonic game to fly through as quick as you can, this should not be it. The second way to play this game is to try and collect 50 rings before the end of the stage, so you can play a bonus round and try and collect the 7 emeralds, or I guess in this game they're known as time stones. Collecting all of the stones gives you the good ending of the game and is considered full completion. Playing the game like this is a bit more fun. You can get through levels and look for rings rather than just try and speed through it. But I wasn't a fan of this in Sonic 1, and I'm not really a fan of it here either. It's just too easy to lose all of your rings and have to start the collection over again. And if you reach the end of the stage and get hit, then it's just too much of a waste of time. When I played this game for this review, I tried to complete the game this way. It was more fun than just flying through it, but still I wouldn't say it was a good experience. As an aside, the bonus stages in this game are way better than most of the bonus stages in all of Sonic games to date, since they're a bit more forgiving. When I finished the game, I didn't have all of the time stones, but I had enough of an idea of the experience and I was ready to jump to this video and tell you all how Sonic CD really isn't all that. But then I remembered that I haven't actually tried the third way to complete this game, largely because most YouTubers never recommended playing it this way. You can skip all of the time stones and get to the third ending if you go full Muppet and play this game the way it was intended. Each stage has past and future posts littered throughout them. The goal is to find one that says past, run through it, reach and maintain a fast enough speed which causes you to go back in time, and then there you must find the single generator in the level and destroy it to create a good future. By destroying all the generators in the game, you can fully complete it. Each stage starts out in the present. A future signpost will move you forward to the bad future of the same level. If you destroy a generator and then hit a future signpost, you'll see the good future. So each stage was designed with a past, present, good future, and bad future. The problem though is that going to the future is completely pointless. And all I ever felt the future signposts did was get in the way and force me to keep myself from going too fast because I didn't want to time travel to the future. I wanted to go to or stay in the past and destroy a generator. You could technically beat the game without once going to the future. It's just there to show you that if you destroyed the generator and time traveled before going to the end of the level, you created a utopia. Which I guess is sweet but feels totally unnecessary. Another issue is when you pass by a signpost, it's not always easy to find a way to pick up speed long enough to travel. The stage does give you locations where you're guaranteed to pick up the speed you need, but it's not that uncommon to be frustrated because you find a signpost and then you hit a slowdown while trying to time travel, and now you have to find a whole different signpost. However, I find the challenge of that to be enjoyable in most cases. It was fun to try and look around to find a good location to pick up a lot of speed. Heck, it's even fun to treat the future signpost as an obstacle that slows you down so you have to work hard to avoid them. But then when you finally make it to the past, the levels are huge and you're looking for a single generator, which isn't all that fun. Unless you play the game as Tails. For all of you that tried playing through Sonic CD and finding all of the generators and just gave up because the levels are too big, you should try it again as Tails. His ability to fly completely changes my opinion of Sonic CD. You can explore these vast and beautiful stages and look for signposts and generators and all that fun stuff. Have you ever just decided you were going to beat a game no matter what? That's what happened to me during this playthrough. I was adamant that I was going to get through the game and create a good future in every stage. I was frustrated 2 or 3 times to the point where I had to look up a guide, but other than that, it was incredibly fun. In Sonic CD, Tails' flight allows you to actually enjoy the vast stages by giving you a chance to move vertically in ways that Sonic could only dream of. Add on to that, the improvement of boss battles and the iconic head-to-head foot race with the Metal Sonic, and you're in for a treat. And a side note, whoever decided to put the 1-up before the Metal Sonic race, bless you. The few times I've played this game, I found myself really having to test my skills to win the race, and it's always a joyous relief when I do. Having unlimited lives really helps speed up that experience. Another thing to note, I used to always think it was dumb that Sonic games take away the ring for the final boss fight, but when you play this game's final boss and you have access to rings, it kinda shows you why they do it. It's just way too easy to defeat these bosses when you have unlimited hits available. But all that being said, I went back to this game not expecting to enjoy it nearly as much as I did, and I'm happy I decided to play through with Tails because now I have another classic Sonic game I'll be going back to. And now it's time to discuss what seems to be everybody's first Sonic game. What happens when you take Sonic 1 to the United States and are asked to make it appeal to the Western audience? Speed, speed, and more speed. Gotta go fast. Those Americans love that speed, am I right? I wasn't in the room when this game was being created, but I gotta imagine it's kinda how the conversation went. Sonic 2, while containing many pure platforming moments, has such high-octane speed-induced moments that many fans to this day cannot associate Sonic with anything other than frequently moving and quick-time reflexes. It says a lot that upon release of Sonic 2, so many people never made it past Chemical Plant Zone, but still played this game more than any other game in their library. Those first two zones in particular gave kids such an adrenaline rush that allowed Sega to cement their legacy as a juggernaut of the 90s, and created a fanbase that is a staple of the gaming community to this day. And I mean literally. You cannot release a Sonic game without a large chunk of the fanbase comparing it in some fashion to Sonic 2. The entire Boost Formula 3D games seem like they were designed off of what players enjoyed in Sonic 2. Because Sonic 2, I'd argue, is the game that cemented why Sonic was better than Mario for a lot of the fans. And that foundation still holds up to this day. Like I said at the top of this video, there isn't a series that exists that contains a fanbase that's as overwhelmingly passionate and simultaneously toxic as Sonic does. I have a theory as to why that is, although I've already discussed that theory pretty in depth during my 3D Sonic Retrospective in Reverse series. But Sonic was literally marketed to appeal to kids to think they're better than Mario fans because they like Sonic. The Sonic fanbase from the start was a group of individuals meant to get into Mario fans' face and tell them why they're babies for liking Mario. At least that's the way I remember it. And that's the way Sega marketed it. And over the years, you've seen that same toxicity leak out with every generation. Tons of complaining about minor details that any other game series would have just not batted an eye at. And it all branched from Sonic 2. A game so great, it created a whole subculture of passionate gamers, for better or for worse. Similar to Sonic 1 and CD, my go-to is now the Origins version. Unlike Sonic 1 and CD, my first experience with Sonic 2 was on original hardware. When I traded the SNES for my neighbor's Sega Genesis, he had Sonic 2, 3, and Knuckles, so I got the full experience, along with Comix Zone, which is still one of my favorites, and Echo the Dolphin, a game which I wonder to this day why I even enjoyed. When it came to Sonic 2, I was very much little brother. I experienced most of this game playing as Tails. I still thought it was a ton of fun, maybe it's because we were young, but I don't remember it being as pointless back then as it would be if I played it today. One of my favorite memories was making it all the way to Oil Ocean Zone and spawning with one life remaining at a checkpoint, and running forward across a collapsible bridge as Tails while my older brother wasn't paying attention, causing him to basically have to jump off the cliff and accept a game over, with no continues remaining. We never made it that far again, and actually that's probably still the furthest I ever made it in Sonic 2 while playing on the original version with the archaic lack of saves. Albeit I've never actually tried to go back to it since I was a kid. I assume I'd get through it easily if I really wanted to give it a shot though. Regardless, I've replayed the game quite a few times. It's always such a treat and generally an easy experience with minimal deaths until the endgame. And even then, I still love it and take long enough breaks between the playthroughs so the endgame can still give me that sense of frustration I've grown to love. And honestly, I still can't figure out how to beat the Death Egg without waiting for it to jump and land. I've watched a ton of videos of how people do it online, but sure enough, anytime I reach it, I get killed as soon as I make an attempt. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The point is, I'm no stranger to Sonic 2 no matter which version I'm playing. Now I do believe that Sonic 2's music is the most iconic of the classic Sonic games, but that's honestly a totally subjective point of view. Regardless, I think Sonic 2 strikes gold in every zone. I wouldn't even know which one to pinpoint as my favorite. There's obviously the Emerald Hill Zone theme, and even the epic introduction to Wing Fortress Zone that finds a way to make you know you're at the end game of the game strictly with the powerful music you're listening to. I know it's Sonic, and the music is always expected to be good, but Sonic 2's music is very likely the best of the classic era. And the Sonic art style, themes, level design, badniks are a visual treat. While I do think Sonic CD and 3 are overall better looking games, Sonic 2 isn't that far behind. I enjoy progressing through the acts and seeing how each new zone takes our blue hedgehog into a new environment. I especially love how the backgrounds change depending on your elevation. It sort of gives you a perspective on how large the stage is, while also giving you a reference to keep track of your location. Sonic 2 has the same progression as basically every other game in the classic era. You go through multiple zones, most of which contain 2 acts, with a boss battle at the end of the acts. I'm a big fan of the boss battles in this game. They're more unique than Sonic 1's and about on par with CDs. Each act contains multiple routes that you can take, which is key not only to the replayability of this game, but also allows for multiple styles of play. In general, the game will reward you for taking a more difficult path, usually towards the high ground, instead of just holding right. Oftentimes, if you take a second to time a good jump or go through a bit of platforming, you'll be rewarded with longer stretches of bursts of speeds for your trouble. Whereas if you take the easy road ahead of you, you might be punished with a painstakingly slow water section you'd have to get through. There are literally decades worth of gamers that will talk about how bad the water sections are and how easy it is to just get crushed and die in certain locations, and how there are moments where the game will betray you for doing what's expected of Sonic and going fast. And a younger version of myself might have agreed with you. But the aspect of Sonic 2 that most differentiates itself from Sonic 1 and CD is that the game gives you avenues to use to avoid these hazards. Whether it's through learning to use Sonic's physics to your advantage or taking alternative routes. If I was strictly discussing the Sega Genesis version, I'd say this is probably not worth getting through due to all of the quick deaths and lack of a proper save option. But in this remaster, it's much more enjoyable and really gives you a chance to replay the acts and learn how to overcome seemingly impossible points of stages. I get that that's classic game design at its fullest, where a game expects you to lose a bunch of lives to learn how to beat the levels, but this is a classic game after all, so what do you expect? Besides, with the updated save system, I think it definitely holds up in today's market. Well, most of it anyway. You have a great start with Emerald Hill, and the training wheels come off right after that with a high-speed chemical plant. Aquatic Ruins is fairly generic, but has a unique enough boss battle to make it memorable. Casino Night is an iconic setting repeated to this day. Hilltop introduces a fresh mechanic with seesaws. Mystic Cave has the entrance to the Hidden Palace Zone, and the whole awesome story around it being finished in the remake, and the infamous Pit of Death leading to it is the cherry on top. Oil Ocean Zone gets too much hate in my opinion. I think it has just enough of late game difficulty I'd expect from a classic game and a super unique setting. Which leaves us with what I believe is the end game. Metropolis Zone, Sky Chase Zone, Wing Fortress Zone, and Death Egg Zone. Let's skip Metropolis Zone for now. Sky Chase Zone is a glorified cutscene, and I don't mean that negatively at all. You're up in the sky with tails flying you towards Robotnik in a setting that really stretches the severity of the moment. You're literally being carried to the climax of the game, and the transition to Wing Fortress Zone is just perfect. The powerful theme kicks in, and you're left on this giant ship trying to figure out how not to fall down and plummet to your demise. The unfortunate thing is that you will most definitely plummet to your demise because this act is hard. But to put things into perspective, I think I spend more time on Wing Fortress Zone than most of the rest of the game combined. And it doesn't help that it's quickly followed by Mecha Sonic and the Death Egg, which you have to defeat with no rings. Quite frankly, I'm not ashamed to admit that I had to use guides to beat them the first time. I applaud anyone that managed to beat Sonic 2 in the 90s without using any guides, because getting through this game without any saves or knowledge on how to progress seems like it was impossible back then. I mentioned earlier that as a kid my brothers and I never made it past Oil Ocean Zone. It's because that's just how you were playing games back then. You'd keep playing and losing and starting over. There's probably only a percentage of gamers that bought Sonic 2 when it released on Genesis and made it to the Death Egg, and even smaller of a percentage that actually beat it. Yet despite that, there are so many people that will say Sonic 2 was their favorite game growing up. Gaming was just different back then. Luckily, that's no longer the case with Origins, as you'll beat the game if you put in enough time, and maybe look up how to beat Mecha Sonic in the Death Egg. However, I need to backtrack for a second. Metropolis Zone. Before I actually get into it, I had been wanting to start a YouTube channel for a very long time, and amongst the many other talking points I wanted to discuss, one of them was the hatred for Metropolis Zone. Quite frankly, I don't understand it. Like, sure, it's 3 acts instead of 2, but the first 2 acts aren't even that bad, and it doesn't even really get that difficult until halfway through the third one. Maybe I've always liked it because it's littered with Pokemon. What? You don't think that's clearly Scyther, Krabby, and Staryu? Come on now. This trio and the giant screws that you run on are probably responsible for all the hatred Metropolis Zone gets, which I never understood. In pretty much every other area of Sonic, fans will go on about how getting hit and dying and having to redo an area is all part of the Sonic experience. I'm not sure why Metropolis Zone in particular doesn't get those same excuses. It's very much okay to get hit in a Sonic game, because unlike other platformers, if you're holding a ring, you won't lose a life. It shouldn't take long after getting hit to figure out how to get around Scyther, or to avoid Krabby altogether, or to just keep running and pray that Staryu doesn't stop you. And guess what? If they do hit you, grab your ring and either kill them or run away. This is Sonic. Stop dwelling and just keep moving forward. You want to complain about a zone? Complain about Mystic Cave Zone. It has no reason to have as many stopping points and death traps as it does. It's not fun. It has no speed. It's like someone ripped it out of Sonic 1 and threw it smack dab in the middle of Sonic 2. It's easily my least favorite zone of the game, and I'm surprised that it doesn't get more hate. In fact, the only thing I hate more than Mystic Cave Zone are the bonus stages. I've said this earlier. I'm not a fan of trying to collect 50 rings in a Sonic game, just to enter a stupid, broken bonus stage that is barely winnable. It's been a consistent theme in the series so far. This playthrough was my first true attempt at beating the bonus stages in this game. I got to about 4 gems and just gave up. It's too time consuming. And that's with the Sonic Origins mechanism that involves collecting coins throughout the game. These coins allow you to immediately repeat a bonus stage if you fail. If you have a ton of coins to burn through, and you must do so, I think it's worth going for full completion of this title only in the Origins version. Otherwise, while the reward of Supersonic is super cool, it's also super not worth going through the agony to play with a character that essentially ruins the experience by breaking the game. But credit to Origins, the coin factor alone makes it the definitive version of Sonic 2 in my opinion. That being said, I will still continue to casually revisit this game from time to time and just spend a short amount of time quickly running through it and getting lost in my thoughts while remembering the old days, even if the following game is what I'd consider my favorite. You guys know the Doki Doki Panic meme, where the YouTuber jokingly pretends nobody knew that Mario 2 was a reskin of Doki Doki Panic? Well, we need one of those for the whole "and Knuckles" thing. You all know the story, and I don't think it's necessary for me to discuss the combination of the two games. It's Sonic 3. That's all everyone has viewed it as for the past couple of decades now. Even if some of us, including yours truly, as a child, didn't realize you were supposed to combine the games. I don't think I ever got far enough in Sonic 3 as a kid with or without Sonic and Knuckles locked onto it to know they were two halves of the same game. I just figured Sonic and Knuckles' whole gimmick was letting you play as Knuckles in Sonic 2 and 3 while also providing you with a separate game known as Sonic and Knuckles. But the whole of Sonic 3 is loved to this day. Many claim it to be their favorite 2D Sonic title of the 90s, and really the only reason I have to add "of the 90s" at the end of that is because Sonic Mania makes a strong case of being an improvement. But prior to Sonic Mania, Sonic 3 being the best 2D game in the series was generally undisputed for roughly 20 years, and that's despite the fact that it never got any real re-releases for a long time. It managed to come out in all the main collections and compilations as Sonic 1 and 2 and saw a Steam release in 2011, but beyond that it missed out on almost every compilation re-release that the other classics saw. And although it took about a decade to hear anything official about it, it's because of licensing issues related to the music done by Michael Jackson, which is something that's fairly well known in the gaming community. Regardless, this means that Sonic 3 missed out on the awesome Christian Whitehead mobile ports for Sonic 1, 2, and CD from back in the 2010s. Fortunately, however, it was included in Sonic Origins Collection with all of the facelifts that the other titles received from Christian Whitehead. I know hardcore fans are probably better off going and playing Sonic Air or another modded version of Sonic 3, but for the mainline gamers looking to play this game on a current generation console, this is a completely viable way to play the game. It's the way I played the game for this review, but keep in mind the Genesis version was already almost perfect anyway. All in all, I'm a big fan of Origins. It's nice to have an official way to experience these games in a nice complete package with all the extras it offers. The first time I played Sonic 3, I got to experience most of the game as Tails, the little brother experience. And well, when I found out he can fly in the game, I was blown away. I couldn't do that in Sonic 2. All of a sudden, there were moments where my older brother had to rely on me. Sonic 3 was designed just different enough to Sonic 2 that it made the game worth exploring in, which meant that Player 2 got a chance to shine because Player 1 would often need a lift. At the time, I probably thought this was the better game strictly because Tails could fly. I'm really not sure what my obsession was with flying characters in the early 90s, but it always made me like a game more when a character could fly. Probably because it was just easier to control. Regardless, as the years went on, I started to play this game with more skill and figured out how to reach areas without needing Tails. Eventually I realized that Sonic and Knuckles wasn't a sequel and started playing the whole game together as a package. And man, it was awesome. Every single time I ever picked up this game to play it in the past 30 or so years, I've managed to love it even more than the last time I played it. Back then, it was all about finding a way to the end of the stage. Then it slowly became about finding different routes, and then it became about finding different hidden areas and whatnot. The levels are so vast and different that even the most recent playthrough I did, I managed to find hidden areas that either I completely forgot about or I have not seen altogether. I don't have a single bad memory playing this game. Even the stupid barrel and casino night was worth getting pissed off about all those years ago because of the memories it created for me that I cherish to this day. Man, I love this game. While Sonic 1 and 2's soundtrack are all around more iconic, Sonic 3 definitely has some of the higher highs. Granted, many of them are lost to the Origins port, but let's pretend they're not for the sake of this video. Sonic 3 was the first time I could use the word atmospheric to describe music and audio in general in a video game, and it was in one stage. It doesn't necessarily hit a home run on every track, but some of these stages are made so much better by the music in them, because some of the zones feel less like you're playing a game and more like you're in the game itself. It's probably no surprise that it's primarily in the zones that Michael Jackson had a hand in. The prototype tracks that were implemented on the Origins version feel up to par with the rest of the game, but the tracks we lost were some of the best in the series. Regardless, I don't want to hound too much on the change to the music in Origins. Sonic fans always used to say that they'd rather Sonic 3 gets re-released with different music than not re-released at all, but of course when Origins came out, they suddenly changed their minds, but what are you gonna do? Origins released before the current renaissance got into full swing, so everyone had to claim it ruined Sonic 3. But let's get to the actual game. You're given an opening sequence that explains everything you really need to know. Super Sonic flies in, crashes into Knuckles, he takes all the emeralds, and leaves you alone on Angel Island Zone. This feels a bit different to the last Sonic game though. The stage looks larger. There are all these pockets all over the place that might pique your interest and make you want to explore. You still could do the whole speed momentum thing and hold right and jump just like you did in the last Sonic game, and some areas will require it, but some areas will also require you to slow down and do some platforming. Unlike Sonic 1 and 2, the platforming areas aren't a drag either. They're a good test of your control of Sonic, especially in the first level where it sets the tone for the rest of the game. Sonic 3 is quite frankly the perfect balance between speed and platforming in 2D Sonic. I genuinely believe that, and I enjoy both aspects of it equally. I love the exploration in this game too. There's just so much hidden throughout the stages that I find myself being surprised by new locations all of the time. And it's actually worth exploring because hidden throughout the stages are the golden rings which take you to the Blue Sphere bonus stage. Easily my favorite bonus stage in the Genesis series too, both in the way you find them and the way you actually play them. They're a great test of your reflex and skill and are easy to master after a few attempts. And while they do get significantly harder in the second half of the game when you're going for the second set of emeralds, it's still very much beatable and is made all of the better with a coin system in Origins that allows you to repeat a bonus stage without having to find another ring. Similar to the previous games, I don't really like how Supersonic and Hypersonic for that matter break the game, but I gotta admit being able to transform into them is one of the coolest things in gaming. You feel so strong and invincible, and after hearing all about going super through the Saiyan arc, when you finally see Goku transform, it's one of the highlights of your childhood. Oh, sorry, wrong series. Anyway, in this game you can play as Goku, Krillin, or Piccolo, and full completion entails finding the 7 Dragon Balls in their playthroughs. Okay, I'll stop, although I did forget to make the same joke during my Vegeta videos. Sonic 3 also sees the addition of power-ups in the form of elemental shields. You have your fire shield that protects you against fire but also allows you to do a forward burst obliterating everything in your path. The water shield throws you in a bubble and allows you to drop quickly to bounce and reach higher places, while it also allows you to remain underwater without drowning. The electric shield protects you from electric sparks, gives you a double jump, and also pulls any rings in your vicinity towards you to collect them. They're a great addition to the game, and finding an elemental shield is always worth it. You also have the Insta-Shield, which I think is possibly the best move in all of 2D Sonic. Yes, even more so than the Drop Dash. Once you start getting the hang of using the Insta-Shield, it's so hard to play a Sonic game without one. You start to fly through the game and not worry about the angle you hit Badniks from. As long as you do that quick swooshing press at the right time, you won't take a hit. Such a simple addition to the game, yet it's so worth it. Anyway, as you progress through Angel Island Zone, you'll see it go up in flames, and it's so cool seeing the normally green opening level just burn down like that. That's not the only spectacle though. The scene with the giant ship dropping bombs is also iconic. Obviously, I know you can just hold right to avoid it, but the first time playing this game, you might make the mistake of trying to dodge the bombs and facing death. And I've always appreciated that you can see Robotnik out in the distance flying rather than just pulling up to him and finding him waiting like you normally would. And as soon as you beat him, you see that stupid red echidna again trolling you and throwing you down to the water below, where you'll experience your first smooth stage transition. I love these little transitions between zones and acts. I think it adds a good amount of character and continuity to the game, and I definitely appreciate it. Knuckles' antics see you falling down towards Water Village, but for some reason people think it's pronounced Water Village. As far as second stages goes, in my opinion, this one does everything better than Chemical Plant did in Sonic 2 and isn't as memorable as a result. It throws you into some amazingly fast areas while also requiring some slow platforming specifically due to some water. There's a good amount of exploration that I appreciate, and I'm a big fan of the boss battles and the gimmicks they have. Marble Garden is up next, and the game really starts to test your platforming, but also providing some speedy moments throughout. Unlike most, I enjoy the sections with the spinning tops since I think they provide a different challenge in the game and just adds a little bit of variety. All in all, I like all of the challenges this zone provides. Some tropes are strictly used in this zone, so it makes it kind of unique. But if you want to talk about unique, Carnival Night. Okay, maybe it's not that unique since every Sonic game seems to get one of these levels. Heck, I almost called it Casino Night Zone just now. This is my least favorite zone in the game. It feels ripped straight out of Sonic 1. It's slow, time-consuming, has stupid moments where you're just flat out frustrated regardless of how many times you've played the game. The only cool thing about this level is how memorable it is because of the aesthetics and because of the barrel. There's a certain sense of nostalgia to it as a result. It's also one of the levels that suffers from the change in music, but even the original soundtrack didn't make me enjoy it per se. On the other hand, Ice Cap Zone 100% is less enjoyable with the change in music. Not that I consider the new music bad, but Ice Cap Zone's original music actually makes you feel like you're out there. This zone in particular is what I meant when I said this was the first game that had music that I could describe as atmospheric. I appreciate the opening snowboarding portion of this level and the general difficulty spike it contains. It's a good transition to the final launch base zone, which sees you fighting to stop Robotnik's giant station from taking off. I like that as this stage starts you can see the Death Egg in the background getting ready. I like the boss battles you face in the ending cutscene after you defeat them, showing the Death Egg crashing down. As far as standalone games go, it was a nice ending to the Sonic 3 half of this game. But once I reached Mushroom Hill Zone, that's when the game starts to take off. The levels in the and Knuckles portion of this game are so much more unique than Sonic 3. Mushroom Hill Zone's aesthetic and its fun boss fight, Flying Battery Zone providing a good difficulty spike that carries on to the rest of the game, Sandopolis Zone really testing your wits and forcing you to use your brain in some crucial moments, Lava Reef having two completely different acts equally frustrating, unique, and memorable, Hidden Palace Zone being an obscure setting with this giant Death Egg in the background while also putting you up in an epic fight against Knuckles, with the mural in the background foreshadowing what's to come, the legendary Super Sonic. Seeing Knuckles finally join your team because Robotnik betrayed him, opening all of these portals for you so you can climb to the next zone, and I mean, Sky Sanctuary. Come on, it's so epic. All of these weird Robotnik robots that make you feel like you're nearing the end of the game, coming face to face with Mecha Sonic, running your way up the collapsing Sanctuary at full speed. It's just so cool and memorable. And just as Sanctuary collapses, we finally land on the Death Egg. It's been foreshadowed all game, but we're here. And it's no walk in the park. There are all these little challenging gimmicks with gravity that you might face, tons of potential death moments, random areas that you'll have to use a combination of your brain and platforming skills. It pretty much checks all the boxes for a difficulty spiked final zone, including the final boss, which you're allowed to face with rings, until you die the first time. Then it's a one-hit death just like the previous game. A good battle nonetheless, with multiple phases and likely a lot of deaths while you learn the patterns. But finally, assuming you have collected all of the gems, you get to take on the real final boss in what can only be described as an epic ending to the classic era. Super Sonic, or Hypersonic if you've gotten all 14 emeralds, flies through space and absolutely obliterates the final boss. I mean, sure, you might have to use a little bit of skill here, but it's not even remotely challenging and is just meant to wow you. Such a great ending to the game, and with that, Angel Island is risen up to the sky and the credits roll. My most recent playthrough of Sonic 3 was perhaps the best playthrough I've ever done. I think it was the first time I actively wanted to find as many hidden rings and bonus stages during a playthrough as quickly as I could. I explored so much more of these massive stages than I thought I would, and I enjoyed the game a lot more. It's amazing how big some of these levels are and how many different routes are available in each zone. It's even worth it to play through the game with Knuckles and Tails because it actually provides different routes due to their abilities, which adds even more replayability to the game. I enjoyed Sonic 3 so much that I was half considering 100% completing it again with Tails and Knuckles as soon as I finished with Sonic. And the only reason I didn't is because I wanted to get on this review while my feelings for the initial playthrough was still fresh. This was all a bit eye-opening for me. I spend so much of my life thinking about how perfect Super Mario World was, that I think I forgot to think about how perfect Sonic 3 was. I always knew it was the best Sonic game, but I don't know why it never occurred to me that it was probably the best game in the classic era of both Mario and Sonic games. And I mean, why wouldn't it be? It came out a solid 4 years after Super Mario World and had 3 different Sonic games before it that I was able to build off of. The movement and gameplay were perfected by this point. As amazing as it feels to control Mario in Super Mario World, learning to control Sonic and mastering his movement in Sonic 3 is much more rewarding. As great as the openness of Mario World's overworld was, Sonic 3's acts in and of themselves had so many more different areas to explore in the stages themselves, and almost all of them are hits and don't feel repetitive. The longer and more challenging stages with varying gimmicks more than make up for the fact that there are technically less of them than in Mario World. It might have taken me 30 or so years to admit it, but I think Sonic actually did manage to surpass Mario in the early 90s. But he wasn't able to do it with Sonic 1, 2, or CD. It took him until February 1994 to beat 1990's Super Mario World. As a Mario and Nintendo fan born in the 90s who says Super Mario World is his favorite game, I genuinely believe the peak of classic 2D platforming occurred with Sonic 3 in 1994. Well, actually, Donkey surpassed it, but we already went through that. But while Donkey Kong was doing his thing, a console generation began to add another dimension. Sonic had more pressing matters to worry about. During the classic era in Sonic 2 and 3, we got a glimpse of Sonic Team's earliest attempts at designing Sonic in a 3D space with the bonus stages in those games. Sonic 2's Half-Pipe didn't really give you full control of Sonic more than it simply allowed you to scroll left and right while jumping, and Sonic 3 limited you to 90-degree turns, but both tested your speed and reflex in a space that wasn't typical 2D side-scrolling. Sonic CD, on the other hand, had you control Sonic in a 3D space, and it was basically the first time we got to feel how a potential 3D Sonic could control. It was pretty clunky, and really highlighted how much we weren't ready for 3D Sonic in the early 90s, but it's actually really cool seeing Sega's first attempt at giving you full control of Sonic in a 3D space, albeit in nothing more than a flat bonus stage, but still. Right around the mid-90s though, Sonic teams started experimenting with the next logical evolution towards 3D, the isometric view. Sonic 3D Blast used pre-rendered 3D models turned to sprites, a practice that had been made famous by Donkey Kong Country. The game was even ported over to the Sega Saturn, which is underwhelming for the Saturn itself, but shouldn't take away from the fact that it's a definitive version of the game. And I did want to briefly acknowledge that the bonus stages in that version were yet another display of what's to come for the future of 3D Sonic. The issue though is that the game was just not fun to control in this manner. I actually think the visuals are not all that bad, and if the gameplay had been more enjoyable, it might have been forgivable. The checkered patterns are a nice callback to the 2D games, but it definitely would have been nice to have varying environments, and that's part of the reason why I think the Sega Saturn version is definitive. But even then, the game was just too empty. Plus, Sonic 3D Blast contains a generic story without any characterization and relies solely on its gameplay for success, which just wasn't good gameplay at all. Beyond that, during the mid-90s, Sonic never really got a proper 3D title in the low-poly era. I always dreamed of a Sonic game with low-poly graphics during the late 90s. I don't know why I always wanted it. Not only did I never have a Sega Saturn, but I hadn't even seen one in person. I just remember a few of my friends in school had it, and would always talk about it like it was the superior console of the time. Unfortunately for them, Sega completely dropped the ball with the Saturn and could not keep up with Sony. Now Nintendo couldn't keep up either, but they didn't necessarily fail. I don't remember when exactly I got a PlayStation, but what I do remember is going over to my friend's house and playing Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot's whole playstyle is what I envision a 2D platformer to look like when it's over the shoulder. The hallway or tunnel playstyle that you run through to reach the end of the stage. I remember as a kid when I saw Crash Bandicoot games always thinking it would be so cool if this playstyle was implemented into Sonic. I mean, think about it. Narrow levels requiring quick reflexes and shifts in your movement, platforming challenges and bad guys blocking your path. It's literally been used to some extent in most 3D Sonic games, especially in the boost formula. I'm not a game designer, but I think that era could have handled the speed and low polygons if they streamlined the levels and made them linear. The depth perception issues could have been fixed with a homing attack, or even a double jump, or anything else that was strategically implemented during that era of gaming. I genuinely think a game in that fashion released as a launch title for the Sega Saturn might have changed Sega's history. The issue, however, is Sega liked to take risks and aim higher than they're able to land. And I'm not sure why I'm saying liked in a past tense, they still do that. Instead, we got four main things for Sonic during the mid-90s. The cancelled Sonic Extreme and Sonic the Fighters, which didn't make it to the home consoles back then, and Sonic Jam and Sonic R, both releasing in 1997. I actually think these two titles tell us a lot more about Sonic's transition to 3D than any other title ever could. Sonic Jam released slightly earlier than Sonic R and contained what was a compilation of the older 2D titles, excluding Sonic CD. It also contained a 3D space museum known as Sonic World. You were able to take full control of Sonic and run around in a 3D space and interact with various objects. It's surreal seeing Sonic here. It makes you think an open world Sonic game could have been designed in this fashion, but it also kind of highlighted that maybe the technology, or really Sega, was not quite ready for that jump. Knowing them, they'd probably have just made it Sonic 3D Blast but with an over-the-shoulder camera instead of an isometric view. But regardless, seeing Sonic move around in this 3D space with those low-poly models is something I dig. And if the Saturn wasn't a colossal failure, then Sonic Adventure could have looked like this. And it's not even like you couldn't use this as a template to design a fast-paced level, because the next Sonic game release was Sonic R. I unironically love this game. This is exactly what I always wanted as a kid. Take a low-poly Sonic, run around a 3D space, and find a way to move faster. It's all there. Granted, it's a racing game, an unbalanced, crappy one at that, but that's besides the point. When I play this game, it feels like I'm playing a 64-bit Sonic game, because that's almost what it was. It's just watered down with only 5 stages and not really set up with badniks in the way that it should be. But regardless, when I play this game and when I run around in Sonic World, I can see what Sega was looking for leading up to Sonic Adventure. Sonic World largely resembles what you might come to expect from Sonic Adventure's 3D hub. And in many ways, it's more relatable to the classic fans because Sonic and the surroundings match the art style many people loved in the classic era. And likewise, Sonic R plays like a footprint to what would ultimately be the various levels in Sonic Adventure. A linear stage with a start and end point that you're trying to finish as fast as you can. It's very easy to scoff at the Sega Saturn. I never owned one, so maybe it was worth scoffing at. I'm not sure. But I did own a Dreamcast, and many people consider it a colossal failure, but I loved it. And I especially love the Sonic games I played on there. So maybe if I had somehow ended up with a Sega Saturn, I'd feel the same way. Maybe Sonic R and Sonic Jam would have been these amazing Sonic games that I played as a 7 or 8 year old that I still remember fondly. Again, I'm not sure. But in hindsight, while during this whole transition there was a commercial failure for Sega, I don't think it's the fault of Sonic's transition to 3D. Once again, I have to bring up Mario. Sonic has always had two primary disadvantages to Mario that he was never able to shake off, and probably still hasn't shaken off. The first is that Sonic started later than Mario. He always had to play catch-up. When Mario was experimenting with rail shooters and God knows what else in the early 90s, Sonic was starring in his legendary classic game 5 or so years after Mario had starred in his. The other disadvantage Sonic had is that his gameplay is significantly more demanding than Mario's. The speed and physics required to design a good Sonic game is so much more complex than what it takes to design a good Mario game. Now, I'm not by any means implying that Mario is easy to design or easy to control, but Sonic's control has always been to take what Mario does and add more oomph. If you play the 8-bit Sonic games, they don't feel anywhere near as smooth to play as the 8-bit Mario games. It takes Sonic being in 16-bit to compete with Mario's 8-bit style. Again, because of what's required in Sonic's movement. Playing Sonic in 32 or even 64-bit feels like playing Sonic in 8-bit in that regard. It's just clunky and reinforces that when it came to 3D, we needed Mario to set the path for Sonic to build off of. But I do think in an alternate reality, Sonic could have shined on the Saturn. If you take the style of Crash Bandicoot's levels, mix it with Sonic R, and throw in Sonic World as the hub world, we might have seen the Mario 64 rival for our Blue Hedgehog. And maybe, if Sega was a bit smarter in the way they did things, that game would have been released by them in 1997 or 96, and the Saturn might have flourished. But I think in typical Sega fashion, they bit off more than they could chew and started going towards what ultimately became Sonic Adventure too soon. And as a result, they couldn't release the big blockbuster they needed during the Saturn era. Now all that being said, the whole point of everything I'm saying is to address Sonic's transition to 3D, and whether or not it was actually as rough as the gaming community claimed it was. And well, it was, but it wasn't a rough transition just for Sonic. It was a rough transition for the entire industry. It took Mario almost 6 years to transition from Super Mario World to Super Mario 64, with a whole lot of weird games in between. Sonic's transition from Sonic & Knuckles to Sonic Adventure happened in less than 5 years, almost 2 years less than what it took for Mario to go from World to 64. And during that time, we kept playing the classics. The infamous rough transition to 3D everyone jokes about for Sonic didn't actually occur. When the jump to 3D happened, we all enjoyed Sonic Adventure and Adventure 2. Everyone I knew did anyway. Every Sega kid that was involved in the Mario and Sonic Playground Wars of the 90s proudly felt they had their 3D title to beat out Mario's. I didn't even know people disliked the adventure games until I started watching gaming YouTube videos in the mid-2010s. Luckily, I think there's hope for the Sonic series and its fanbase. And it's largely coming through this current Shadow the Hedgehog renaissance that I'm totally relishing. Sonic Unleashed, Sonic 06, and even Shadow 05 are being defended, included by yours truly. People are seeing the good in these games and not obsessing over every minor detail. These games obviously weren't perfect, and in many ways are downright broken, but they never deserved the amount of hate they got. I remember not too long ago Sonic Heroes got that same amount of hate, and now it's no longer considered the start of the bad Sonic games. I don't mean to absolve Sonic Team and Sega for the blame of what they faced, because really, they dug their own graves over the past 30 years. But the generation I grew up with, the Play It Loud generation, the one that grew up not only obsessed with Sonic, but obsessed with console wars, obsessed with insulting Nintendo fans, and obsessed with this ride or die attitude that it's Sonic or bust, the ones born from the mid-80s to the early 90s specifically, they are the ones that had the rough transition to 3D. They took their miserable perspectives and forced them down everyone's throats in an era where doing so got you clicks and subscribers. And as a result, Sonic suffered significantly more than he deserved. But hey, he's being saved by my favorite Sonic character and my favorite actor, so it's not all doom and gloom.